Hello everyone, Karnasa here and welcome back to Kerbal Gets Real. We are now in the year 1959. We have reached the end of the first decade, and boy what a decade it has been. We have achieved our first orbit, we have achieved our first crewed orbit, we have gone round the moon, we have impacted the moon, and now, at the end of the decade, we hope to go interplanetary. But before going for all of that interplanetary stuff and going to Venus, we've got a little bit of work to do. We're going to pick up the first Rendezvous contract, we're going to upgrade a new launch pad, and we're going to bring back Aperture 2 because I completely forgot about that in 1958. Whoops! So yes, this thing had a whole 40 science on board, which was enough for us to unlock prototype Hydrolox engines. Now, because we have gone and picked up that Rendezvous contract, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make a few edits to the Odyssey series of rockets, because currently it can't do any orbital maneuvering whatsoever. No, it's got those retro rockets in its nose cone to get it safely back down to Earth, but that's about it. We have added there the AJ-10 mid-engine, we have added some radial tanks, and we're going to fill them up with hydrazine. We're going to add some RCS thrusters on it as well, and that should hopefully do the trick of actually being able to, well, rendezvous with something in low Earth orbit. Now, what I've not shown you in this episode, I have created a target for this thing to rendezvous with. However, it was very simple. It's just a probe core with some solar panels on it. I will show you the launch, but I thought that would just waste some time really showing the building process of that thing. But here we have the launch of Target 1 on the 2nd of February 1959 on a Hercules small launch vehicle, and this thing, well, it went off without a hitch. We've seen these plenty of times before. I did forget to put retro rockets on that core stage though. Now, at the end of last episode, I did have Odyssey 2 pretty much all built up. I think I had about 9 hours left on that thing to actually make, so you might be wondering, why didn't I launch that at the beginning of this episode? Well, I didn't have anyone trained to actually fly that thing. But here we go. On the 21st of February 1959, we have Odyssey 2 on a Hercules launch vehicle. We are being piloted by Jane Jones. Jane Jones will be, hopefully, the first woman in space. Now, I have picked up a rather large amount of these crewed orbital contracts this year, and there is a reason for that. They give me about 160,000 funds every time I do one of these. And to be honest, I might as well at the moment because I've got the rocket built up. The rocket doesn't cost all that much, and yeah, it just gets me a lot of money back from really not doing an awful lot. I have exhausted all of the science from these crewed missions now after this launch though, because you can go into the capsule and you can configure crew science, much like the way that I've configured probe core sciences with some of my actual probes. And there's 4 that you can use on that basic Mercury capsule, and obviously I did 2 on the first launch, which you can only have 2 at once. So yeah, 2 on the first launch, and then I've had 2 more on this launch, and yeah, so I have fulfilled basically all of the science that is possible from crewed flight at the moment. But still, money, all of that money. Now, we may have completed all the crew science that we can do at the moment, but don't worry, as soon as we unlock the Gemini parts, we can do even more. But here we are, we're going to accept more orbital flight contracts, as well as the early communications network contract for 4 satellites. But now, this is going to be the focal piece of this episode. Well, it's going to be Hermes 1. Hermes, so named after the messenger of the gods. So, if that doesn't give this away, what this thing is going to be, it's going to be our probe that we are going to be sending to Venus. Yes, that's right, this is going to be our first foray into interplanetary flight. And that is, well, really, really quite exciting. Now, what I have done this design, well, what I have tried to do with this design is I want to get a flyby at least a flyby. and I know that this thing should definitely be capable of a flyby. Like I can see, I've got my Kerbal alarm clock up there. I can see that the Venus transfer window is going to take around 3,460 delta V. But what I would really like to do, which is why I have got that small thruster stage on this probe core, is I would quite like to orbit Venus. Orbiting Venus would be incredibly nice. It means we can keep this probe there for a lot longer than just a quick flyby. If we orbit it there, we can get all kinds of science and all kinds of fascinating knowledge about our sister planet, our rather hot, inhospitable planet that, well, quite frankly, I wouldn't quite like to go there on holiday because I might get a bit of a sunburn while being a lot closer to the sun and having, yeah, it's very inhospitable at Venus, so yes. But anyway, we hope to gather all kinds of scientific knowledge and data using this Hermes 1 probe, and that is really why I would like to orbit it, as well as if you orbit it, there are more contracts that you can unlock. And a great thing about the flyby and orbital contracts is that you don't actually need to have launched a new spacecraft. No, they will work with a spacecraft that you have already launched, which is fantastic. It means that you can, well, kind of already have the orbit or the flyby ready, and then you know that you're not going to fail the contract. I guess that's in the game because some of the far-flung planets such as Uranus and Neptune, well, they take a very, very, very long time to get to, so I think they might take longer to get to than the contract, the maximum length of time that a contract allows you to do, so I guess that might be why those contracts allow you to do that, but I don't really know. Now that we have unlocked early human spaceflight science, we are going to edit Hermes still because we unlocked some new science. And of course, if we're going to somewhere that's completely new, we are going to want to get all of the science that we can. And you can see I have created two variants of the Hermes rocket. We have Hermes 1 and we have Hermes 2. Now, that's just for redundancy, really. I've only made two of them in case one of them fails. So basically, if Hermes 1 fails, then at least we have Hermes 2. And what I have done in order to make them kind of be built in time for that Venus transfer window, I have actually rush built them, and that cost a lot of money, but I wanted to be safe. It's better to be safe than sorry, I guess they always say. So, Odyssey 3, on the 8th of April 1959, on a Heracles launch vehicle once again, Albert Harper is at the controls. And now, he was our first man in space. We do have a third astronaut, Karen Richards, but unfortunately, at the moment, she is still completing her proficiency training. So once again, it is up to our man Albert to do the impossible and to rendezvous with something in space. Now, that's exactly the purpose of Odyssey 3, and let me tell you, it did do that. It successfully completed that contract. However, it completed it in a way that I wasn't quite anticipating. So, we have already completed the contract by this point of the flight. Now, what I think happened is because my core stage has avionics on it, when that capsule detached from it, it counted as two spacecraft being, well, relatively close together, which was enough to fulfill the contract. So I thought, well, rather than spending a really long time trying to actually rendezvous two things in low Earth orbit, let's just have this thing fly around in space for a bit and then bring it back down. Not really bothering with it. We completed it. It's fine. Now, one thing I really want to talk about now is the actual formatting of these episodes. Right now, we are doing an episode a year, and that has been how I've been doing it since, 1951, minus that one build episode, which I just released. However, 1959 took a really long time to film. The years are now getting to the point where a lot is going on in a single year. So what I am almost certainly going to be doing from now on, from 1960, from the next actual year episode, is I will be doing half a year per episode. So what I will do is I will do from January to the end of June in one episode, and then the next episode will be July to the end of December. And I think that means I can kind of highlight more of the interesting goings-on that is going to happen in the year, and probably as I get further and further into this series, it will change then down into quarterly. But here we have Hermes 1 on a Hercules 2 launch vehicle on the 26th of May, 1959. Our first attempt at going interplanetary, and it's very, very exciting. Well, it would be. If that damn engine didn't shut down, we had a transient engine failure on our LO-105, which is, well, yeah, So that meant that this rocket was basically a failure. There was no way this was going to work, so, well, we blew it up. Now, luckily, not even 2 weeks later, we roll out Hermes 2 because I built those two at the same time. This on the 6th of June, 1959. Now, I did say that I built two of these for redundancy, and I am so glad that I did, because obviously that first Hermes rocket failed. And here we have, well, the final stages of the ascent to orbit, and Hermes 2 was successful. We had to use a little bit of fuel from that transfer, from that Venus transfer stage to actually get us into orbit, but it was fine. We got our maneuver all plotted, and we ignited that engine again. Remember, this engine is a Juno 6 engine, and it actually has 3 ignitions, which is really, really nice. That meant we could use it to finalize our orbit, and then we could use it to actually make our transfer to Venus, and it lit both times there. We got the full burn out of this engine, and we had to use that little bit of our final probe core stage to really finalize our approach to Venus. Not that that really was a worry. That final stage really only was there just in case we may be able to get an orbit around Venus. And there we go, we have got our approach. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually fine-tune that approach to get it down to around 150 kilometers, because obviously the closer to the planet that you are, we can use the O-berth effect to try and really use the planet to help us out as much as possible with our capture burn, which is really nice. And especially once you've got a planet like Venus, I mean, its gravity is about the same as Earth. It's around roughly the same size as Earth, so, you know, it will give us quite a substantial boost, much bigger than, say, if we were to use a planet like Mars. Mars being smaller, the effect won't be as great. But here we are doing our little bit of a burn to try and bring our periaps down at Venus to a much more considerable periaps. And now that I've got it down to about where I want to do, I'm going to create a maneuver node. And you know what? We've got enough delta V to make an orbit. Well, with the success of Hermes 2, we have gone interplanetary. That's right, we have got a probe that is going to visit a different celestial body in our solar system. That's really exciting. And you can see there, we're actually finally getting science from the sun, which means we get a lot more science. So, of course, we can go into research and development and pick up some new lovely science nodes. Now, what I'm going to go for here is I'm going to improve my avionics and solar power, because we always could do with better avionics. And I have been mainly using RTGs to power my probes. Ideally, I don't want to be using an RTG to send a probe to Venus. Venus being closer to the sun, you're going to get a lot better use out of solar panels. So I really should be using solar panels. But unfortunately, my solar panel technology is lacking compared to the, well, nuclear power that I guess that we've kind of been going along the lines of at the moment. So yeah, that's why I've got the RTG to Venus. But it's not all that bad. I really like using RTGs because they provide a lot of power. I think they cost a fair amount more than solar panels though, which is why if you can use a solar panel, use a solar panel. And well, I seem to just be getting loads and loads of science in at the moment. Obviously, I've got several probes around the moon now. I've got a probe going interplanetary. We will be getting science all the time. And now, well, yeah, because we're unlocking a lot of stuff, that means we can go in and develop new probes. And this one is going to be focused on around the Earth because it's got a special component that we really want to use. This is going to be using ScanSat. And now I like using ScanSats, and I want to try and send as many ScanSats to as many different planets as possible because it gives you an absolutely gorgeous, detailed map of the planet that you are scanning. So this is aptly named Scan 1, and we are going to launch this, and we are going to try and get an altimetry reading of the Earth. And we can actually pick up contracts for that as well, which is really cool. There we go. Conduct a low-resolution scan of Earth, and we are indeed going to be doing that. But first, we have Odyssey 4. So yes, Odyssey 4 on, once again, a Heracles 2 launch vehicle on the 6th of August 1959. Now, because it's Odyssey 4, we have seen this, 3 times already, so I've decided to skip the vast majority of this launch. Jane Jones, once again, was the astronaut who risked her life to get to orbit, and, well, there wasn't really much of a risk at all. She was completely successful And the mission, well, yeah, it went off without a hitch. And like I said, these missions are really purely for money at the moment. We got no science whatsoever for that mission, but that's not really what they're designed for. We need to keep our space agency afloat. We have to have the funding coming from somewhere. And, well, if it's not space tourism, it's sending up astronauts. Apparently, that will give us money. And that's one thing about the crewed orbit missions that is always a constant, reliable source of income in RP1. So yeah, if you've got a decent rocket that you can send crew up in, do it, because you will be getting constant income and hopefully you should never run out of money. And here we have Scan 1 on Hercules Small, Heracles Small, the 25th of August 1959. Our launches are getting very rapid now, especially with these Heracles Smalls. Well, now, I forgot to put avionics. Well, no, that probe core does have avionics. I just forgot to set it in the vehicle assembly building, which was really, really silly of me. So this thing had absolutely no control whatsoever once it got to orbit. However, I got it in a sufficient orbit. I sent it in a polar inclination that it was actually able to achieve the scan of Earth successfully. And I didn't actually need to do anything with it once it was in space. Now, another contract we're going to go for Molniya orbits because, well, it's just something else that we can do. It's a way of making money whilst we're waiting for all the science to come in. So, in order to do this, we're going to have to go once again into the vehicle assembly building, and we're going to have to build ourselves a new rocket. Well, not a new rocket, we're going to have to build ourselves a new payload. This thing requires a lot of payload to get to that orbit. We need 91 units, which is actually a rather large amount. And it's a bit of a tricky orbit to get to, I guess you could say, because obviously you need to be launching in a, well, rather weird inclination. And it's a very strange orbit in the fact that it's half a sidereal day, but it is a very eccentric orbit. I think the contract requires it to be at least 0.7 eccentricity. So yeah, it's a very eccentric orbit. It's got quite a bit of an inclination, and it's quite a high orbit to get to. But with the old crash, with testing in crash, I figured out that this spacecraft that I've put together here is more than capable of actually achieving that orbit, and I think it should be more than capable of achieving the first Tundra orbit as well. So we are going to try and complete the Tundra orbit with this spacecraft as well, but it will be in a separate launch. We will use this one, named Mjolnir, after Thor's hammer, something mythological and sounds like Molniya. That's kind of why I went for it. We will use Molniya 1 to go for the Molniya orbit, that's the word I was looking for, and we will use Mjolnir 2 to try and go for the Tundra orbit. Hopefully that will happen. Can't make any promises. We are, of course, running test lights, so we have no idea what could happen. Back at the Space Center, and it looks like the next thing that is going to be on our agenda will in fact be our Venus encounter. And would you look at that? There we go. We are starting to get science from Venus Space High, which means Hermes 2 has obviously been successful in its mission, and it has gained us, once again, an awfully large amount of science, which is perfect. We can go in and we can go and unlock that materials node and start really thinking about going for those second generation capsules at some point soon. Here we are, Venus approach with Hermes 2 on the 1st of November 1959. We have reached another planet before the end of our first decade, which is really exciting, and here we come fast approaching. And what are we going to do whilst we're here? Well, we already plotted out the maneuver node for it. We are going to attempt to orbit the planet Venus so we can stay here and get all of that wonderful science that we are inevitably going to be able to get if we stay here for longer than a few minutes with that flyby. The great thing about this orbit, we are going to be in space low. We're going to be partially in space low and partially in space high. We have a very, very eccentric orbit around Venus. Obviously, I did not have the Delta V to pull that orbit down to something quite nice. No, it's very, very eccentric. So that's kind of good in a way, because we do get some of that science from space low, and then we do get some of that science from space high. So this thing is going to get us an awful lot of science over the next probably half a year or so. It does have an orbital perturbation experiment on there, which lasts 10 years. And in total will get us around 800 science, I think. So over the next 10 years, until 1970 really, yeah, we've got a whole 800 science to be looking forward to from this one small probe. Well, now that we have successfully orbited Venus, I think the next thing that we're going to want to do with Venus will actually be to send a lander. So the next time that a Venus transfer window pops up, which I already do have on Kerbal Alarm Clock, I think we are going to try and design a lander and actually land it on Venus. Now, landing on Venus isn't all that difficult because it's got such a thick atmosphere, it's really easy to use parachutes there, although you have to use Kevlar parachutes. You cannot use nylon or silk because they will just burn up in the severe heats that are part of Venus's atmosphere. The tricky part to actually landing on Venus is getting the parts necessary, well, the correct parts that are going to be able to withstand the sheer heat that are, well, you're going to encounter in Venus. But enough talk of Venus. We've been there, we've done that, we've spent a lot of this episode on. We've got our Venus flavored t-shirts. I don't know really what else to say about Venus, but here we have the Odyssey 5 on the 8th of December 1959. Now, this is the maiden voyage of Karen Richards as well. Yes, she finally finished her proficiency training, and probably that was going to be the last launch of the Odyssey series, because what we want to do now is we want to really focus on the Gemini capsules, and in order to do that, we're going to have to train up our 3 astronauts to use them. That's going to take some time. You can see here, it's going to take around 525 days to train up in proficiency with that Gemini capsule. Now that's going to take, well, that is a really long time if I'm going to be perfectly honest. So what I've done is I've upgraded the astronaut complex to hopefully bring that down. I think it should. But not even a week later, from the Odyssey 5, we have the Mjolnir 1 on the 14th of December 1959. Now, what I want to talk about in this launch is how I actually managed to achieve that Mjolnir orbit. What I did was, when I launched this, I set its apoaps to be 520 kilometers. That will be what I circularize at. I then use the AJ-10 mid-engine to circularize at 520 kilometers. So I had a nice circular orbit at 520. How many times can I say 520 in a short space of time? So once I'd circularized that orbit, what I did was, when I got to the southern latitudes, what I did was I then planned out my Mjolnir orbit. So I got it out roughly to where I thought it should be. I then burnt to where I thought it should be, and then I got the orbital information screen from MechJeb to check how long my orbit was. And as soon as it hit 1156, then I was happy. That was sufficient to complete the contract. So half a sidereal day, basically. And there we go. There we can see that little probe coming out of its shell. And one final thing that I did with this launch is that I actually was a good space citizen. Game that's never going to come out. Actually, wait, no, it's Star Citizen, isn't it? Yes. But anyway, I deorbited this stage. Yes, we wanted to get rid of it and clean up after ourselves a little bit. But there we go. That was the last launch of 1959. We have now, well, we are fast approaching the 1st of January 1960. So, a whole new decade ahead of us. And what a decade it will be. NASA achieved the moon landings, obviously, in 1969. Can we beat them? What else will the swinging 60s have in store for NASA Space Agency? Well, you will have to find out in the next episode. If you have enjoyed this episode, why not give it a like? If you have really enjoyed this episode and would like to continue with the content on my channel, please do subscribe. I have been CarNasa, and I will see you later.